The ship of dreams sets sail. The year was 1912. The world was full of confidence and new ideas. In Belfast, Ireland, a great ship was built. This was the RMS Titanic. She was the largest ship ever made by man. People called her the Ship of Dreams. They also called her Unsinkable. This was a bold claim, a testament to the era's faith in its own technological prowess. The White Star Line, her owner, promised a new standard in sea travel. For those who built her and for those who would sail on her, Titanic was more than just a vessel. She was a powerful symbol of human achievement, a floating city ready to conquer the vast, unforgiving Atlantic Ocean. On April 10th, 1912, the Titanic was ready. Her maiden voyage was from Southampton, England, to New York City. The docks were crowded with people. They came to see the magnificent ship depart. Excitement filled the air, a palpable energy that buzzed through the onlookers and passengers alike. On board, over 2,200 people prepared for the journey. There were wealthy families in first class, professionals and tourists in second class, and many immigrants in third class. Each person had their own dream. For some, it was a luxurious holiday. For many others, it was the promise of a new life in America, a land of opportunity waiting across the sea. The ship's captain was Edward J. Smith. He was a very experienced and respected captain. This was to be his final voyage before he retired. He stood proudly on the bridge as the Titanic slowly pulled away from the shore. The ship's powerful steam whistles blew a deafening, long blast, a sound that echoed across the water and announced the start of its historic journey. As the English coastline faded into the distance, no one could have known the fate that awaited them. The mood was one of celebration and anticipation. The great ship steamed confidently towards her first stops in Cherbourg, France, and then Queenstown, Ireland, before heading into the open Atlantic. The first few days of the voyage were smooth and uneventful. The weather was beautiful, with clear skies and calm seas. Passengers settled into their routines, exploring the vast ship and enjoying its many comforts. First-class passengers attended elegant dinners and social gatherings. Third-class passengers played music and danced on their decks, full of hope for their future. The ship was performing perfectly, cutting through the water with grace and power. It seemed that the Titanic was living up to every promise. The world watched, and for a short time, the dream was very much alive, a perfect picture of progress and luxury, sailing towards the new world. A floating palace of unrivaled splendor. The Titanic was not just a ship, it was a floating palace. The builders at Harland & Wolff shipyard in Belfast had spared no expense. They wanted to create the most luxurious liner in the world. The first-class areas were designed to look like the finest hotels in Europe. There was a grand staircase covered by a beautiful glass dome. It was made of polished oak and had intricate ironwork. This staircase was the heart of the ship's elegance, a place where the wealthiest passengers would see and be seen. The ship also had a swimming pool, a gymnasium with the latest exercise machines, a Turkish bath, and even a squash court for passengers to use. The cabins or staterooms were also incredibly lavish. The most expensive suites in first class were like apartments. They had multiple rooms, private bathrooms, and their own private promenade decks. These suites were decorated with fine furniture, rich carpets, and detailed woodwork. Even the second-class accommodations were better than first class on many other ships at the time. Second-class passengers had their own library and a comfortable dining room. The goal was to provide an experience of total comfort and opulence, making the week-long journey across the Atlantic feel like a stay in a five-star resort, rather than a simple crossing of the ocean. Life on board was a constant stream of activity and entertainment. For the first-class passengers, days were spent reading in the library, playing cards in the smoking room, or strolling along the wide, open decks. Evenings were for dressing in fine clothes, for multi-course dinners in the grand dining saloon. The ship's orchestra played beautiful music every day, creating an atmosphere of sophistication and leisure. The sounds of conversation, laughter, and music filled the opulent rooms. For those traveling in the highest class, the Titanic was a self-contained world of privilege, a place where every need and desire was catered to by a dedicated and professional crew. Of course, the experience was different for passengers in third class, often called steerage. Their quarters were much simpler, but they were still clean and considered much better than on other ships. They had their own dining areas and common rooms where they could gather. For these passengers, many of whom were leaving their homes behind forever, the journey was not about luxury, it was about hope. They spent their time on deck, sharing stories, singing songs from their homelands, and dreaming of the new lives they would build in America. The Titanic carried the dreams of the rich and the poor, all together on one great ship crossing the ocean. The icy hand of fate. On the night of Sunday, April 14th, 1912, the sea was strangely calm. The sky was clear and full of stars, but there was no moon. The air was getting bitterly cold. The Titanic had received several warnings about icebergs in the area from other ships. However, the great ship continued to steam ahead at a high speed of about 22 knots. The officers on the bridge were confident in their vessel. They believed that even if they saw an iceberg, they would have enough time to turn the massive ship away from danger. This confidence, this belief in the ship's invincibility, would soon be shattered in the most tragic way possible. At 11:40 p.m., a lookout in the crow's nest, Frederick Fleet, saw something ahead. A dark shape, darker than the sea, was directly in the ship's path. He rang the warning bell 3 times and telephoned the bridge, shouting the chilling words, "Iceberg, right ahead." The officer on duty, First Officer William Murdoch, immediately ordered the ship to be turned hard to port and the engines to be reversed. But it was too late. The Titanic was too large and moving too fast. The ship scraped along the side of the massive iceberg. Below the waterline, the ice tore a series of holes along the ship's hull, like a giant can opener. Many passengers did not feel the collision. Some described it as a slight shudder, a gentle bump that was hardly noticeable. But down in the boiler rooms, the damage was immediate and catastrophic. Seawater began pouring into the ship's forward compartments. The ship was designed to stay afloat with up to 4 of its 16 watertight compartments flooded. The iceberg had damaged at least 5. Captain Smith and the ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, quickly assessed the damage. The truth was horrifying. The Titanic was doomed. Mr. Andrews calmly told the captain that the ship had at most 2 hours before it would sink beneath the waves. Panic did not set in immediately. At first, many passengers did not believe the ship was in serious trouble. The crew began to prepare the lifeboats, but the process was slow and disorganized. There were not enough lifeboats for everyone on board, a terrible flaw in the safety regulations of the time. The rule was based on the ship's weight, not the number of passengers. As the ship's bow began to sink lower into the water, the urgency grew. The orchestra famously began to play on deck to keep people calm. The crew started firing distress rockets into the dark, empty sky, hoping another ship might see them and come to their rescue. A night to remember, a legacy enduring. As the Titanic sank deeper, the order was given, women and children first. This rule was followed, but with much confusion. On one side of the ship, officers allowed men into lifeboats if there were empty seats. On the other side, they were strictly turned away. Many lifeboats were launched only half full because passengers were reluctant to leave the seeming safety of the giant ship for a small boat in the freezing dark. The crew struggled to manage the evacuation. The sounds of the distress rockets and the ship's steam being vented filled the night with a terrible noise. It was a scene of courage, cowardice, and heartbreaking goodbyes under the cold stars. At 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, the great ship's final moments came. The stern rose high out of the water, and the lights flickered one last time before going out forever. Then, with a sound that survivors described as a roar, the Titanic broke in two and slipped beneath the surface of the Atlantic Ocean. Over 1,500 people were left in the freezing water. Their cries for help echoed across the silent sea. The lifeboats were nearby, but most were too afraid to go back, fearing they would be swamped by the desperate swimmers. Within a short time, the cold water silenced the cries, leaving only a dreadful, quiet darkness. The rescue ship, the RMS Carpathia, had heard the Titanic's distress calls and had been racing through the dangerous ice field to help. It arrived about 2 hours after the Titanic had sunk. The crew of the Carpathia began the grim task of pulling the survivors from the lifeboats. They rescued just over 700 people. The rest were lost. When the news reached the world, there was shock and disbelief. How could the unsinkable ship sink on its very first voyage? Newspapers printed long lists of the dead and the saved. The world mourned the immense loss of life, a tragedy that touched families from all social classes. The sinking of the Titanic had a profound and lasting impact. It shattered the public's faith in modern technology and led to major changes in maritime safety. New laws were passed that required all ships to carry enough lifeboats for every single person on board. The International Ice Patrol was created to monitor icebergs in the North Atlantic shipping lanes. The disaster became more than just a historical event. It became a legend. The stories of the people on board, their bravery, and their final moments have been told and retold, ensuring that the ship and the night it was lost will never be forgotten.